All right, Gorilla Banter Podcast, Gorilla Banter Studios, episode 17. 17. Here in studio, Brock Washington, Matt.
And we have another guest.
We have a guest on phone today, local author, Mr. Dixon Hearne. How are you doing today, Mr. Hearne?
I'm fine. I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Oh, another beautiful day here in Louisiana summer.
Yeah.
Without rain today.
Without rain. Hopefully you can go off this whole weekend, beat that grass back down.
Tropical storm done left.
Yeah, had a little tropical storm blow through last week. Made my life busy, I know that. All right, so Mr. Dixon Hearne is a local author. How many books have you written that are fiction, and how many have you written that are nonfiction?
Oh, gee. I wrote one. I'll start sort of back. My first book was a textbook, college textbook, teaching second language learners with learning disabilities. And that was the only, I contributed chapters to several textbooks. But about a decade or so ago, I found myself wanting to write in a different voice than just purely academic. I was really weary of conducting research and writing up research for professional journals and that sort of thing. And I just tried my hand at, just out of the clear blue, fiction and short fiction, particularly short story, and ended up writing a collection of them, stories, and all of them were published in literary magazines, well, various magazines, including Collier's. And I was approached by a publisher, Southeast Missouri University Press, asked me about publishing a collection. So that was the first. And then since that time, as far as fiction is concerned, I have four books, collections of my own. And then I'm the editor of the anthology. I have 4 of those as well. So those are the books that I have in print. And one poetry book, a complete poetry book. It's not a chapter book. It's a complete poetry book that I published last year, as a matter of fact. And anyway, this is what I do. I sort of fell into this sideways, and I enjoy doing it, and I'm passionate about it.
It seems like sometimes maybe our best hopes and dreams are not exactly what we thought they were, right? Well,
I would have to agree with that, certainly. And I think that's one of the reasons writers write, is that that's one of the things that I believe, hopes capture in their writing, what could be, what should be, those kinds of things, as opposed to, the dire situation that is. So.
Now, I do have 2 of the publications with me. Let's see, I'm looking at Delta Flats and Plain Speak, both of which you sent to me. I ate through both of these in one night, by the way.
You were ambitious.
Well, it wasn't even that. Just to speak plainly and to begin with Delta Flats, it had this. It's a group of short stories, and you have this sort of Mark Twain voice in so many of them. This sort of feeling in it that resonated with my childhood, mine personally, and it just blew through it. And then with Plain Speak, you have you're talking a little bit more about the with Delta Flats, I'd say you're talking about Deep South, and with Plain Speak, you're more talking about the southeastern region and the plain. Yeah, southwestern. Excuse me, I'm broken on my own compass. Yeah. And both of them, because they're kind of stand alone and they have their each voice. I mean, both of them intrigued me and hooked me. And then one being.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did indeed. Now, whenever you write, it seems like you're in many ways just going straight off your own inspirations. Now,
I am. Everything comes from my own imagination. None of these stories are true. The first collection that I wrote had some that were 2 or 3 in it that were more fantastical, and people would comment on that. But I need to say that almost all of my stories are set right here in Northeast Louisiana. And I'm one of the I don't know of any other writer who sets their stories here. The only other major writer that I know that used this area, Monroe and environs, for a novel, for example, was John Dufresne, who taught here at ULM for many years, and then, of course, moved on. And Louisiana Power and Light was one of his best known novels, and that's set right here in Monroe, Louisiana, and it deals with the Fontana family of the Mohawk Lounge here. So he wrote that, and it became a New York Times bestseller. So he's the only other person I'm aware of who really farms this area for writing, looking for things. I've always, I write about this area primarily because it's what I know, and it's what I remember, and what I love. And as a child, I traveled with my father, who was a traveling salesman, and I would go on him, in the summers I'd spend with him going on his routes through the back roads of northeast to Louisiana, all the way from, Monroe to Lake Providence, and then all the way down to Vidalia and back across to Columbia, and everywhere in between, all these small towns, country stores that he would call on. And I just heard this choir of interesting voices and discussions, arguments in the country stores, and all these places stuck in my mind. And, of course, all these people didn't know I was listening so well. So years later, I write about my work is inspired greatly by my experiences doing that when I was a child. So, as I said, most of my stories are set right here in northeast Louisiana, and there's just so much to pull from this. William Faulkner is frequently quoted for saying that he writes about his native postage stamp of soil there in Mississippi because he knew he could never exhaust the material to be written about in that area. And I think many writers, Southern writers particularly, who are, where the area and place are so very important, the setting is so important, that they just draw from that, and their entire literary oeuvre comes from that, their home, their homeland, their soil, their mantra, their alma, rather, their soul, So that's the reason I write about this particular area, and gosh, I know it's inexhaustible.
Well, what I really like about it is that you focus on what most people consider flyovers, flyover areas that no one cares about, and it's the subject matter, and you give it something more than what most people think, because most people are only worried about, like New York, Los Angeles, stuff like that.
Right. Sure.
And there's a lot more to talk about than what most people consider flyover areas. That's just ground from a plane. Who cares?
Right. Well, this is certainly flyover. People who come to Louisiana really only come to New Orleans.
Right.
That's the only place people know of. When I lived in California for many years, and when I was introduced to new people and I said I was from Louisiana, immediately they think I'm from New Orleans, and that's just they're centric about that. They think that everything is like New Orleans here.
It's nothing like Louisiana.
No. And now it's all about the Robertson family.
Oh, well, yeah, we do have that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's all I ever hear about.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Actually, that's interesting you mentioned that. Are they still on television?
They were in their last season. Off the cuff, I can't remember.
I have no idea.
I was just curious.
Yeah, they're in their last season. I think they extended the season. Like A&E had plans for a few more, but then the Robertson family has decided that, they got so many things going on. They got 4 other companies.
They're set. Yeah, they're set. They don't need that.
Yeah. So. Well, and know the history of this. I understand how this came to be, and you got to have a gimmick and that sort of thing. So they've milked this pretty well in terms of they farmed it well, and it's provided for them very, very well. And there's a shelf life to everything.
Absolutely.
I was thinking about this show when I was a kid growing up, called the Beverly Hillbillies, and that was a great big hit, and it was a hit for such a period of time that then people, became kind of numb to it,
You gotta know when to call it.
Everything has a shelf life.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of a show like MASH or a few other like that transcend that 10-year mark.
They
You
do.
know, shows
They
that
do.
go beyond that decade. That's when you know you have a show that has a universal.
There's very few that
There,
manage to
exactly.
do
That's what I'm
that.
saying. That's
You're right. There are very
So
few.
very few.
You used a good example there with MASH because it is archetypal that way. You could plug that in to any period, and people would understand it.
I mean, I think
You
it.
know, really
Oh,
get
I think it almost resonates again today.
Yeah, it's still entertaining.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
soldiers and people who
Sure.
have,
Sure.
seen that area.
And you're right. You're right. There are very few like that. If you look at the history of television, I mean, how many really are, really lasted that long and really, struck at the heart of the human being like that particular series did, and that, today kids watch it, young people watch it, and they look at the world, the war going on in the world, and they understand this. It's something they can truly relate to just almost immediately,
Absolutely. Now, going back to Delta Flats.
Sure. That one, by the way, Delta Flats was nominated for the William Faulkner 10 Award this year.
Well, hey.
But that hasn't been the award hasn't been made yet, but it was nominated for that. My first book, first collection, Plantation, High-Toned and Low-Down Stories of the South, that was nominated for the Hemingway Award.
I like that name.
So,
That's a cool title. That was a cool title.
Plantation,
Yeah.
High-Toned and Low-Down Stories. Yeah, that one. I enjoyed writing those. That was my first collection, and some of them people. It's amazing what you hear from your readers or people who like your work and they write to you. And one of the stories in there is based on a real event. You guys are too young to remember, but at one time, where Highland Park Country Club, Johnny's Pizza, administrative building, that was Highland Park Country Club at one time. And on the other side of the golf course, I grew up in the neighborhood right there beside Johnny's.
On near North 7th and all
Highland Park
that.
Country Club, right. Yeah. And right across the street was where the rodeo grounds were. They were right there beside each other. And the cows and the calves and things would get out from time to time, and in the mornings they could find them grazing on the golf course. It was really quite funny. But my cousins and I, they lived across the golf course from me, and we would go to the rodeo grounds lots of times in the summer, and when the rodeo was not there, and then when the rodeo came to town, we would be run off by the people there. So I wrote a story about that, a comical piece about this event that happened. The event did happen. It was just exaggerated in the story there. But that's the kind of thing I really enjoyed writing, particularly at that time, was reminiscing about tales from my own childhood and events in my own area, my small world there, So anyway, and for Delta Flats, that really is a little more far-ranging. The last section, the blues section, I included some things and a couple of stories in there that really, were kind of new for me, almost experimental pieces that I wrote. Don't Try Me, for example.
Right.
That won second place in the William Faulkner novella competition 2 years or 3 years ago. But that short story won second place in the novella competition, and that encouraged me to write another just sort of companion piece for that were more, sort of Southern grit, kinds of pieces, which is really popular right now, this, sort of grit lit it's referred to.
Right.
But anyway, those are the roughest pieces I've read so far. But that one story, Don't Try Me, I'm developing into a novel now, and I'm about 2/3 through it. So,
Nice.
and I'm real happy about that. It turned out some of these things just take on a life of their own. You never know what's going to click with readers or where it might lead to. But I've got a lot of reaction to that particular one. John Dufresne, the author I was referring to, wrote me and told me I really needed to develop that into a screenplay or a movie, and I was, so I've been tinkering with that in the back of my mind. But anyways, I'm not writing for anything other than just, literature for short fiction or novella or whatever it is I'm writing. I'm not thinking beyond that at the time. but I'm always amazed at the reaction I get from people, from the readers out there.
Now, when you write, do you find yourself just putting it all out there? You're not even sure where it's going to go. It's pen to paper, and let's see where this adventure is. Or are you more of the type to have an ending and then construct a beginning? I mean, what would you say your process is?
Well, that's an interesting question. I get asked that. Well, not as well as you. Usually, people want to know what's your mode or, what's your approach to it. But you've done a good job there. Actually, it's a combination, but I would say probably 90% of what I write, fiction that I write, it starts with a voice. Typically, starts with a voice. And the place just is right there. The voice and place are just right there. And then I start writing down the images that are in my head and the voice, and I let the voice, that's the narrator, and the voice just sort of leads me through. I wrote many of my short stories came to me fully realized, and by that I mean they were already there in my head, and all I needed to do was sit down and write them. So I just started, and I write on paper, longhand, on paper. I don't type it until I've written a hard copy. That's the way I work.
Good for you.
With a tablet, and that works great for me and many other writers. There's just something about that graphic feedback that while you're writing it down, you're thinking as you go, and you've already by the time you're grown, you begin to think as you're writing. As you're writing, your mind is sort of going at the same pace as your handwriting. So those come together there, and it's a nice smooth flow. So it works well for me, and I just write the story from beginning to end. And this is not swaggering boast, but very, very few of my stories do I ever revise. It's like the narrator has told the story, and that's that. The story. That's the story, and that's the way that it was meant to be told, and all the revision in the world is not going to, that would only distort the story itself. So I'm not really big on revision, and I know that goes completely against, all the MFA program, Master of Fine Arts programs, and everything that is said by presumed experts out there who say revise, revise, revise. But that hasn't been a problem for me. So I just follow my own instincts about all of it. But I do just write. I don't sit down and mouth out a timeline or any kind of outline of any kind. I never do that. I just trust. I've learned to trust the narrator, the voice in my head that's telling the story, and give it free rein and see where it takes me.
The college literature community is just screaming at you.
Yes, of course they are. And it's interesting you even say that. Many of my closest writer friends have gone through Master MFA programs, and they're the products of those. And they were trained, really indoctrinated to think in that mood. But when they think about all the great, writers in our, just take the United States, all our great writers, none of them went through MFA programs.
Yeah, I doubt that Leaves of Grass was revisioned over and over again.
No.
Walt Whitman just wrote it.
Well, I'm a current college student, and that's all they just beat it into your head. You need to revise everything.
Of course. What are you? I've got a question for you. Where are you in an MFA program?
No.
Okay, where are you going to? ULM?
I'm going to Louisiana Tech.
Yeah, and so are you? I'm not sure what you're referring to now about the writing. Is that your
just
English teachers?
I take several history classes, social science concentrations usually, and just any time we write, they're just beating into your head. Just you need to revise everything.
Yeah.
But I guess in my situation, it's a lot more statistical.
Yeah, I truly believe that most people outside the I want to say the arts, whatever it's liberal arts, it's humanities or liberal arts, depending on what university you're at. Mm-hmm. Those things are always arbitrary what they're called. But people outside of that, when they say revise, what they're basically saying is edit. They want you to go, and what they're saying is, I want you to go back and look this all over for problems with grammar, mechanics, and usage and spelling. And that's what they're really after.
Right.
But but that's not revising. That's editing. That's the difference between the two.
Oh, no, but even whenever I was doing my English literature classes for the GERs, general education requirements, they were just, it was just always, like whenever, the few times I had to write a short story, it was always just, you need to revise and rethink the whole thing and just make sure that's what you want to put on paper.
Yeah.
And I think you should do this or that. And I'm just like, and I'm no writer. I'm no short story writer. I'm just not.
Sure.
I'm not about to make any story anybody wants to read.
Right.
That's just not my thing. But that is how most universities are. And I don't know. I feel like the original idea is usually the best.
Well, they're there to give you. That's the purpose of the university, particularly, is to give you the form.
Right.
And we've forgotten that, the ancient dictum, form follows function. That function is primary. That's the first thing you do. So it's functional to me when I sit down to write to follow the narrator. This is the function of writing fiction, is that you're not trying to give it structure right away. You're letting all those thoughts get down on paper, and then the form will follow. And if it doesn't make sense, then I would go back and, pull it together and give it the right syntax and that sort of thing if needed, But we do that in university. I'm a retired academic myself, so I know how this goes.
I'm sure you do. Especially,
I've had these discussions many, many times throughout my career.
Especially writing for the textbooks, I'd imagine.
Well, I review text. I review books too. I review books for University of Mississippi Press, and other places publishers I've reviewed books for too. But it's one of the things that they do too. Even in sending me the guidelines for reviewing a particular book, they're basically telling me this is how we want it, the order in which we want it. And they don't really want you to vary from the standard, structure that they've given you to do it. And I feel very constrained to do that. I've never read a really good review that just, looked like, say this, do that. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying.
Painting by colors. I've always thought about that with in writing, I can't imagine doctors, doctors would never go into an operating room and open up a manual that said, first do this, say this, do that, this is next, follow that straight through the operation. That's not the way it works. Well, to me, that's analogous to a writer. Right. Just adding up, showing that the 8 parts of speech and demonstrating that. That isn't right. That isn't creative writing. All that does is demonstrate that you have mastery of the rules of grammar, and you understand those things. But whether or not you can take that and tinker it into something that looks like a story, fiction, an essay, that's an entirely different thing, But that's what we do. We assume with kids going through school that we teach them all the rules from first grade all the way to 12th grade, and it's repeated over and over through school so that we learn all these, hundreds of bits of rules about the language, and that the end objective is if you know all those things, you'll be a proficient writer. Well, we all know that. College freshman English teachers can tell you that's simply not true.
Right. For the first time, it seems like a lot of these college students probably actually think for the first time when writing only in college.
Right.
I mean, I remember so many times in high school, we were told what we were going to write about. You're going to write about this. Now write this. And, the very cone of thought is already hampered. Yeah, I mean.
I remember how upset I was the first time I took an English class, and they literally just told us, you write about whatever topic you pick. And I was just like, you need to no, that's not how this works. You give me a topic, and that's what I'm supposed to write about. I've never done this.
Yeah, it is disorienting. I remember when I was my first year after I graduated from high school, at West Monroe High School, and my first English class there, freshman English, and I had a teacher there. She was an instructor. She wasn't one of the professors. She was just at the instructor level, but she had us write. The entire course was going to be writing themes, and that's all we were going to do for that course. And of course, most of us in class had no idea what she meant by a theme. We were never asked to write that in high school. We didn't really have a frame of reference for it, you know. And I wrote those for her, those various things for her. And my first one I got back, I got a B+ on it. And I couldn't tell you, still can't tell you today how she arrived at a B+ for it. So, because in school, this is the way teachers have done it forever. Everything was a 100-point scale or a 10-point scale, and what they do is go through looking for errors and then count up those errors and subtract them from 100.
Yeah, and very so little is about the actual content. Yeah.
It gives you nothing. It gives you nothing. Our context just doesn't tell you anything except those bits and pieces that they were looking for, and that's it. And I was expecting that when I got to college and when we were asked to do something creative like that right out of the chute, like everyone else in the class, we all looked like, you know, we were just completely at sea, had no clue what she was talking about, you know. So it didn't prepare us well. High school didn't prepare us very well for that.
So, you know, I think we all go through this kind of issue. But,
sure.
So how did you arrive at the thought that you were going to create that voice in your head, that narrator? Because, I mean, after this answer, I want to read Terms of Inducement out loud. Because
I don't know what here's the thing. You hit on that one. It's so funny you selected that one out because many people do. And I think it's because it's a very brief called short or flash fiction. And many people single that one out. It seems to have all the elements somehow.
Yes.
And you're about the 10th person who singled that out, you know, to ask me a question about. It's real weird that you did that.
Hey, you know, that lets you know, sir, that you have something there.
It's a prime piece.
Well, I mean, and Matt hasn't read this one yet.
I haven't.
So before we even, you know, but first how did you develop this narrator in your head? Because I'm telling you, when I read this woman in Terms of Inducement, I knew Aunt Edna. I knew her. It was like, oh yeah.
Yeah, well, that's mostly it. It isn't just that one. I'll answer that question in just a second. But that's the thing that the first reaction I get from people when I do book signings, for example, and when I do readings and that sort of thing, the first hands go up and the first question they say, how do you know my aunt? How do you know my uncle? How do you know these people in my family? How do you know my neighbors? How do you know all these people? And that's because we're from the same neck of the woods.
There's a truth to it. There's a truth to it.
Yeah. So that's it. But as far as the narrator is concerned, the narrator is different with every story. And it's just something that kind of nags in my head. Like I told you, every story that I've written, I mean, I think everyone began with a voice, began with someone in my head, and it's they won't shut up. they want to tell the story, and so I have to just start writing, let them tell the story.
That's beautiful.
And this one, Don't Try Me, that's that one particularly, and then the novella that I wrote, I forgot to mention that earlier, I wrote a novella too. That's the one that won second place in the William Faulkner. That's called Don't Try Me, and that's set right here, and I get a lot of reaction to that because it's a comical piece, but people can relate to the characters in this story. People can relate to all of them, you know, because it's set right in some fictitious town here, like at the edge of Ouachita and Jackson Parish, but that person just came into my head. I wrote a story years ago. It was published in a literary journal, and that voice was still in the back of my head after I finished it, and then it's been there all these years, but she wasn't through talking yet. So
right, yeah.
I ended up writing a novella because she, in the back of my head, kept talking and talking and talking, so I wrote it down, started getting it all on paper, and that's the way these voices come to the characters. That's the way they begin for me. It's not something I can predict. It's not something that I actively seek to do, if you understand what I'm saying. They just,
I do.
I get an idea for a story, and the voice is just right there, the person telling the story, whether it's a narrator or one of the characters in the story, or it's just right there. It just comes to me out of my own imagination, period.
Well, with that being said, let's see. And this is in part 3 of Delta Flats, right? Turning points. Yeah, right. Terms of inducement. Let's listen to Aunt Edna's voice for a second. Things hadn't been the same since Aunt Edna hauled herself out to that shack out on Caper Hill. She got good and mad at Uncle Lute for siding against her with the neighbors over a matter of no consequence and drove off in the night. It ain't till next day that we find out where she lit. The shack and the land it sits on belonged to her family. She grew up on it before times got better and the family moved to town where she met and married Uncle Lute. I mean, just this part right here. It's like, oh yeah, that's my family. Yeah, I know exactly where this goes.
Crazy.
And even in the context of when you say it ain't till next day.
Yeah.
You know, all right. But her daddy couldn't part with it, and he kept it patched up against the elements right up to the day he plopped dead in his soup bowl at the supper's table. It ain't pretty to look at, that house. Sits cattywampus on an ugly gray cinder blocks, and every square inch of wood siding is flecked and peeling. I hadn't been out there in 3 years myself, but I owed it to Edna to go check on her. So, I mean, no one has spoke really in this story yet. I mean, he's just recounting.
Right.
But the pictures are already so vivid. The words, so beautiful.
I don't think you could say cattywampus anywhere else. People have any idea what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Someone says cattywampus, I'm just like, oh, I get it. Yeah, I know that.
I drove by that house on the way to work yesterday.
Yeah. That used to be my neighbor, that cattywampus shack out there.
She's a funny one, ain't Edna? Pulls up some sort of stunt every other year. Everybody says she's crazy, and just lately, I'm thinking they might be onto something. She's got running water out there, but no electricity. And she's cooking in the fireplace, just like we did growing up, she says to me when I arrive. After she pumps me for news back home, I tell her I ain't been back there since she left, and I don't plan to. I tell her she's being plain silly roughing it out here while Uncle Lute's back home enjoying his TV on that big sofa. That's all he's got, Irene, she snaps back at me, a TV set and an old couch. He needn't hope to ever share it again because ain't nobody else would put up with him. I mean, the first things Aunt Edna says is like, oh, if that ain't my aunt, that's my grandma, you know.
I get this so often.
How well you capture these things is the things that it just fascinates me. You mean you don't care if he takes up with another woman, I joke? But Aunt Edna just shows me a smirk and throws another log in the fireplace. I'm done with him, she fumes. A team of mad oxen couldn't drag me back to that hell house. I got all I need right here. Then it's a good thing your daddy patched up the roof before he passed on, I said to her. Look like there's some heavy rain on the way. She doesn't respond, so I let the matter drop right there. But I keep one eye peeled on the sky darkening in the case window. Now I'm going to put on a pot of coffee for us, so just park yourself in that rocker. And I don't want to hear another word about Luke Yoakum. Aunt Edna is not one to rile, and I sure don't want to watch her neck veins bulge like they do when her temper flares. An awkward minute passes between us, but the spell is quickly broken by a troubling rumble somewhere out front. Oh, Lord, Aunt Edna declares at length, I hear your Uncle Lute heading up the hill in that raucous old truck of his. We both hush and lean toward the door like two old pointers. Well, you just march right out there and tell that man I ain't budging, she says to me. Go on before he lights and get out of that truck. I inch my way nervously toward the heavy door, but then I stop still. You know that man wouldn't listen to me if I told him he was on fire, I say to her, and sure enough, her veins start to bulge. Now, we're almost completely through with this story. Just a little bit left in here, but every bit of word usage here has a purpose. Every bit of it.
Well, thank you.
and I mean, the images, the words that it goes through, and even to the veins starting to bulge, you know, every time. Okay.
Well, that's one of the, I've been kind of amazed by that. I guess that's, I get that a lot from writers who tell me how descriptive I am, and I often get comments about my description and imagery. People frequently refer to the imagery and
yes,
and also how I capture this Southern dialect, peculiar, to hear. So.
This is a very specific dialect you've captured, because I'm having Urania, Louisiana flashbacks.
yes. Actually, yeah, about 5 miles down the road from here.
Right.
From where?
Urania.
I know where it is. Of
Yeah.
course, I grew up in West Monroe.
That's where my family is.
Yeah, Luna area.
Well, one of the things I also get people in writing reviews. You can probably read them on the back of from not from that, but Delta Flats. You can see what some of my reviewers have written. But one of the things that I get about that, people compare me to other writers, particularly Mark Twain. It was interesting that one of you mentioned that earlier. I get that occasionally. But Flannery O'Connor and Eudora Welty and other Southern writers, and of course, and I had one that was about the postmaster. That was from Tikva to Shangaloo, and I got people saying, many people, not many, but several, told me that this is really reminiscent of Eudora Welty's Why I Live at the P.O., a short story. But I never read Eudora Welty's, that short story by her, until after all of that story was written. So, but, my response to them when I speak and people say, this seems to be influenced by Eudora Welty, and I tell them, Eudora Welty I grew up 120 miles due west from her front doorstep. So, of course we're pulling from the same
Culture.
people, from the same neck of the woods. So, of course there would be things in there that would be reminiscent of her in the language and the inflection, in the situations, of course there would be something reminiscent of her, we knew many of the same kinds of people, it's not as if I'm writing about New York and she's writing about here. And so, no, I'm not overly influenced by her any more than any other Southern writer would be. But my God, she only lived 120 miles from me.
And that's nothing when you talk about the culture of the South.
Well,
120 miles is it's the same world,
and
virtually.
Well, it is, and that's what I try to explain to them, that we use the same dialect, just, the kinds of characters and the situations are so similar. I mean, we have very common experiences. That's what you would expect.
East and west it's not very different, but if north and south 120 miles can get really different in some places.
Different.
Yes.
You go 120 miles south, you're going to meet a completely different kind of Southern man.
And that's and I think that's the beauty of this area, right? Is that you can go far enough south in Louisiana that someone will tell me that I'm not from Louisiana.
Right.
Right.
What do you mean? You don't sound like a Louisianer. But.
Right. Well, we have 4 distinct dialects in the state, and you can drive north to south. You can pretty well, if you travel much, you can tell where you are geographically just by listening to the people talk.
Oh, yeah.
True. So, all right, back to...
And we're unique that way.
Well, it's the beauty of, I think sometimes people don't understand that the reason that this culture is allowed to be so distinct in that north to south way is because we haven't brought in a lot of outside influence, right? We allow ourselves to be individuals, and that individuality does kind of breed that, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see if we can finish Edna's story here.
Okay.
I can't hear over all that racket, Irene. You just tell that old fool I'm through kowtowing, or kowtowing, depending on which part of Louisiana you come from. With that, she's on her feet with exasperation, and we both reach the door at the same time. Whoosh! A great gush of wind shoves us both right back through the doorway. The noise is deafening, but it is not mechanical, as Aunt Edna had presumed. Tornado! She screams, pointing past the front porch, not 50 yards off and closing fast. Like 2 lost souls, we drop to our knees and pray to beat the band, knowing full well it will be our last. And then, crash. Aunt Edna tumbles head over tea kettle clean through the doorway and down the tired old porch steps. Me in tow, both of us wailing at the top of our lungs. Our entire world is suddenly motion. We bounce and tumble like river rubble, beaten tender by the rabid swirl of debris. Then quick as it's attacked us, it's gone. You never know with twisters. They strike on a whim. We rise up cockeyed and disheveled and take stock of ourselves, turning just in time to watch the hateful wind snatch the last stick of furniture out of her house. Aunt Edna's beloved home place is left topless and sadly reduced to 2 walls and a commode. Not a pot, pan, or kettle left to call her own. Wait, wait, it's coming back, Aunt Edna yells, struggling to her feet. I'm absolutely certain she'll drive stroke or heart failure this time. And sure enough, we hear a spiteful roar closing in on us once again. We crane and stare in every direction. Then suddenly, there in the distance, we spot Uncle Lute's old truck treading up a giant swirl of dust heading towards us. Irene, I just went 10 rounds with a tornado, Aunt Edna declares. So I'm warmed up if that man's coming looking for a fight. I'll pitch a tent right here in the debris field, but I ain't going back with him. With that, she turns and stomps off toward what's left of her pitiful house. She is not about to swallow her pride. She stops where the front porch used to be and stares up at the 2 lonely gray walls. He needn't think that I'm cooking for him a meal tonight either, she yells back at me, surveying her property, contemplating the sad and sudden conditions of her life. No, sir, after all this, he'll be damn lucky if I cook his breakfast in the morning.
Well, I'm glad you liked it.
I laughed out loud the first time I read that.
Yeah, I get that from people. 2 of the stories, I had stories nominated for the Pushcart Prize too, which is short fiction. One of them was from the first collection that I did, which was Plantation High Tone, Lowdown Stories of the South, and I had 2 of them nominated from this collection for the Pushcart Prize, individual short stories from it. So. Anyway, I guess I've been doing something right. People ask me to write more. It's just really, I never set out to do any of this. I did this really on a whim. As I said, I really just wanted to try my hand at writing in a different voice, and I'd never even considered fiction. And I wrote my first short story, which is set right here in West Monroe, too, called The Taproot. And that was my very first venture, and I sent that into a literary journal. And they contacted me about a month later and said I won the editor's prize, which was a real shock to me because I had never written a word of fiction in my life. So it makes me wonder now, I wonder what my life would have been like had I discovered creative writing when I was much younger. You just never know what trajectory your life might take had you made a different decision, So.
That's true. I think, though, that's also why it's important for your whole life to be open to new possibilities, different possibilities. I mean, if you'd have told me 5 years ago I'd be doing a podcast, I'd have probably laughed at you.
Right. You have a very good radio voice, so you have chosen something that you start off with a very good, strong strength there. You have a good radio voice.
Well, thank you.
I would have asked, what the hell's a podcast?
Yeah. Well, actually, the funny thing is he said he would have asked what a podcast even was.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, the beauty of kind of this emerging media.
This is a new thing, though. Podcasting is a very new thing.
Right.
And in this area, it's even more so.
Yeah, I still like. Yeah. People are like, I'm like, it's internet radio.
We have a radio show.
I'm just like, it's an internet radio show.
Yeah.
That's just the easiest way for me to explain it because they're not gonna. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean.
Well, I'm low tech compared to you guys.
You'd be surprised.
But I'm happy, and I have the technology to do everything I need to do with it. So I'm a happy camper.
Well, I mean, I think me and Matt make the joke all the time that we're just 2 cavemen who have somehow, through magic, connected wires and cables, and we're well, hey, we got a show.
I think you guys have a wonderful opportunity here, and I'm really flattered that you guys, have contacted me and talked to me, because I thought it's one of the things I've thought since I've only been back in the area for 2 years, and there are no writers groups in the Northeast Louisiana.
No,
there are no
not
writers
really.
groups. There's nothing with writing or anything like that in the area, and I'm sure there are some wonderful writers around, but nobody really knows about them or knows what's going on, So by you guys having that and sort of having guests on who are in the arts of any kind, whether it's a rock band or a writer or, even anything like that, I think that is a real contribution to this area.
Well, thank you. I think in some ways we have a similar vein. You bring the culture of this area. You bring its voice forward in your writing, and in many ways, we just try to find the interesting people in this area, the same type of interesting people, and just sit them down and let them talk, and get the voice out there, and I think
that's what they do with the Louisiana Anthology. Two guys over in at Louisiana Tech, Steve Payne and Bruce McGee.
Yes.
They started are you familiar with them?
I have listened to some of their podcasts. Matt hasn't.
I have not.
Yeah. Well, they're doing a wonderful job with the Louisiana Anthology, and the good thing about that, because they're really created as an anthology, it'll be cumulative over time, and eventually stored at the archives at LSU, the State Library in Baton Rouge. So I think that's really fantastic that there are people in the state who are taking a look at the sort of wealth of talent and people in the state who are doing very creative kinds of things that we've never done before. We've never really documented these people unless they wrote a New York Times bestseller, and then to a small degree.
Yeah, and I think that's I think we're on the precipice of the world just getting smaller and smaller, and cultures and subcultures even, because there's plenty of subcultures in this state. We kind of alluded to that subcultures are kind of disappearing. You used to could go down south and go to a duck house and shoot some ducks, and the lady there didn't speak English. She spoke Acadian. That's all she spoke.
Right.
And in just my lifetime, I remember that lady, but you can't find her hardly anymore. They've passed on, and their kids learned full English.
Sure.
So I think it is important to copy it.
Well,
we haven't done a real good job of preserving these things. I'm sorry, you were about to say something.
Oh no, it's fine. It was just I think it's the internet that's mainly been doing all this subculture thing, that it's all becoming a mesh, and you're not seeing individual cultures much anymore.
Right.
And the same thing happened thousands of years ago whenever they made the book or the printing press.
Yeah.
Right.
Really.
Right. But the internet is unique in that I believe you're right on there. It homogenizes the culture.
Right.
And everybody everybody's like we're all the very same person, and it narrows it, eliminates those, as you're calling, subcultures or different types or different languages, where it really homogenizes our culture to the point that there would only be eventually one culture in Louisiana. And that we lose a lot, obviously, and that's tragic to me.
It is.
It is. Like I said, it's just the precipice that we live on. So I almost sometimes feel like we have to capture it. We have to, whether a guy just opened up a microbrewery, what's his story? Why is he,
that's interesting. That would be an interesting show for you guys to take a look at the microbreweries here and maybe interview a couple of those.
I do have a couple that I'm
creative.
trying to get in.
Is it good? Is the brew good?
Yeah,
I'm gonna let you try it.
Okay, I'll try it. Most of the Louisiana brew, beer I've drank before is, subpar.
Except Abita, right? Like Abita's
I don't know if I've ever had that.
You never had the Abita strawberry beer?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
What?
I don't know.
I don't even know.
I probably didn't get it because it said strawberry on it, and to me, beer just shouldn't have strawberries in it.
But it's Louisiana strawberries.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We're going to have this conversation later.
Is that from Abita Springs, Louisiana?
Yes, it is.
That area?
Yes, it
Okay.
is.
All right. Yeah,
I know what you're talking about now. I've seen it.
I'm watching the
I just
light
haven't
bulb
bought
go
it.
off
I just
right
haven't
now.
bought it. I didn't realize that was local.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna buy that. I'm gonna buy that after I leave here.
Well, we did something today, Mr. Hearne. At the very least, we introduced
I never put that together.
one of our own people to a local
I
drink.
never put that together. I've seen that beer everywhere.
So that's the only major story I want to read out of Delta Flats. One, you were right; it is a shorter story and it is super colorful. But I don't want to sit there and harp on that book all day. But that is a great book with a lot of short stories. I mean, it's short story after short story. And it's 4 parts? You broke it into 4 parts?
Right.
Now, I seen that it was both Delta Flats and Plain Speak are both written in parts. Now, is that something that happened afterwards?
First, Plain Speak is all poetry. It's all
Yes.
poems, and all of the poems in there have been published in magazines or journals, and that's just how it's typically done. Is that you accumulate enough poems, and publishers are interested in you, generally speaking, only if all of those poems have been published in reputable magazines already, and then you pull them together into a collection, and you submit it to publishers to see if anyone is willing to publish it, or if someone approaches you. But I have to say, this is probably as good a place as any. I have been truly fortunate in my writing career, or whatever, my writing phase of my life here. I've never had to go to a publisher hat in hand. I've had publishers pursue me and to publish my books, publish my work, so I feel very blessed and truly blessed that way, because I know there are many writers out there who, send out to, I have statistics from well-known famous writers who sent, their stories out, very well-known novels now that they sent to 36 different places that turned them down, just full of things like that. And I certainly don't put myself on a par with those great authors. I'm just saying that that's the nature of the industry, the nature of the business. And when I was writing the poems for Plain Speak, I had written a lot about the Southwest. I guess my heart is in the South, and my soul is shared between the South and the Great Plains and the Great Southwest with Native American cultures. And you could see that in many of those poems in that collection, And I just feel very, very strong and very connected to those cultures. So, and dividing them up again, that was done by theme going through, because as you get toward the back, there are some in there that have more of a southern bent to them, and I had to kind of divide them up to give it structure and meaning. And so the publisher and I sort of worked together on coming up with a general theme for the sections of it like that. That's how it came about. But I'm still writing a lot of poetry as well. I have 3 poems. One just came out yesterday in Corvus Review, and I have 3 others that are accepted. They'll be out in the very near future by other magazines. So I spend a fair amount of time writing poetry too. It's another passion. Didn't start off once again with any of this. I was an English major in undergraduate school, but I did not do a lot of writing, even in my undergraduate school, because there were no MFA programs at that time or encouragement to do so. But I'm kind of going through that now, late in life.
I would say that you're doing it well. I mean, and you did speak earlier about how if your life had been on a slightly different path, but you never know. It could have been the journey of being a nonfiction guy that allowed you to turn on those narration voices.
Oh, yeah.
So hard to set aside all the, let's be super technical about our writing, but instead, let's go the opposite way now that I've went so hard one way. I mean,
well, it is. It is. It's really stepping, as I call it, writing in a different voice. It's really very, very different. And I get that question a lot from people in audiences, when I'm doing a book signing or book review, and they want to know which do you prefer? You've done so much writing and for academic journals, nonfiction. Which do you prefer? And that's not an easy question to answer. I don't know that it can be answered. They're very, very different kinds of writing, you know. But
sure.
I think easier writing is academic writing. Creative writing comes strictly from yourself. There are no places you can go to look up the right answers or the right way.
Oh, I think that's a big theme right there. Right answers, right? Because I mean, it's just like when you're talking about in college, it's something. To me, it was never more frustrating when I went through college to write a story, and then they'd be like, "Well, why don't you write it this way?" It was always, it hurt your soul a little bit, even in English class so so I got to do it a completely different way. What about, I thought I had a thing here,
But it wasn't their thing.
Right.
It wasn't their thing. That was it,
Yeah, and I guess looking back on it now, a little older, maybe not any wiser, but maybe that's just what it is, that it wasn't their thing, and so they didn't understand it. Or maybe.
Well, I tell you, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was definitely done with that statement.
We have some very talented, I think, very talented young writers in Louisiana now. That I think are underrated. They just haven't made that giant leap, that quantum leap into the big league yet. But I think we have some very talented young writers here. One comes to mind, David Armand. He teaches at SLU. He's a young man, and here in Louisiana, lives in Hammond, and he writes primarily about his neck of the woods in that area there. And he's a good one. And then Darren Dean, who teaches at LSU. These are friends of mine, writer friends of mine, but they're just some really fine writers here. And it's interesting to me that we don't seem to have any here in Northeast Louisiana. You know what I'm saying? It's like if you go down below Alexandria, there are writers everywhere. You get above Alexandria, and you can't find writers.
I don't know about other places in Northeast Louisiana, but I know definitely where I went to high school, there wasn't just the culture of it. It wasn't, and it's sad to say, but if you considered yourself creative or an academic or an artist, it wasn't the cool thing to boast about. You didn't tell people that.
Right. Of course.
And then that's the pattern I've seen. Most of the people that were the academic types or were the artists, they moved somewhere else.
Yeah, or the other thing, there was a guy that was a athletically talented guy who gave himself to football instead of his academic bends. Because I even remember in high school, a certain person in particular standing up and reading poetry that he wrote. And it was like, that came from that guy.
Right.
Now he works heavy equipment all day. But he had a beautiful prose in his voice and in the way things that he wrote. And it's just like, there's also that. I think one of the issues is a cultivation. There's not enough cultivation of it.
Yeah. Well, one of the most famous writers that the Grit Lit group of writers and the School of Writers and many people is Larry Brown from Mississippi, and his work is used by university professors all over as model writing. They use him, as their standard, and he was just a real hardworking, everyday guy, who didn't have any formal training in writing or anything like that, but he had the heart and soul of a poet, of a writer, of an artist. So it can be done, and he's the first example that comes to my mind. So.
Absolutely. Now, just I guess going back to plain speak, is there a time in your life where you spent a lot of time? I mean, you said you were in California, but when I read a lot of this, I get a lot of Arizona type imagery or Utah type imagery. Did you spend time in that area?
I did, traveling around. I loved driving around the Southwest. Many people the drive-bys, the ones who take Interstate 10 or 20 rather, from coast to coast. They're passing right through the middle of the desert. It's like going straight across the ocean, and there's not a lot to see just in the middle of the ocean, you know. Right. But you've got to get off to the sides to go to the islands, and the same thing is true traveling across the desert. You want to see what those beautiful mountains and all the richness of everything there. You got to get off the main road. So I did all of that, and that's why I write about them. I was just really struck by the actual, you know, native beauty of many of these areas, you know. I can just...
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just, native culture, just, I can just see it in my mind. Images I have from my childhood are from TV images, you know, cowboys and Indians kinds of things. But
absolutely.
I've read a lot and done a lot of research on these cultures and see what they really were about. And anyway, so that's why I'm struck by them.
I worked at a zoo outside of Vegas. It was about, 45 minutes outside of Vegas, and I got to see the desert for the first time. And, you know, people act like there's just nothing there, and honestly, it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Like, there's just mountains everywhere, just the way the sun looks whenever it sets down, and the sand is actually, it's actually very gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean,
Did you go to the Red Rock area? The Red Rock area near Vegas there, the Red Rock area, and to the town that is just east of there, sort of southeast of there. I'm trying to think. They have a Native American Indian museum there because they're still digging. It's still an active dig in the area.
I did not go there.
Yeah, very ancient. It's just really, really quite striking.
I didn't even know that there was a place.
Oh, there is. Yeah, I've been there.
Huh, in the Red Rock area, huh? That's, yeah.
Well, the Red Rock area is north of Las Vegas, sort of north of, and this is would be east, sort of southeast of it. And I'm trying to think of the name of the town. There's a small town there, and that's where the dig is, and that's where that was the center of the ancient Indian population there at the time, you know.
Now, I know as far as being struck by the environment, I lived in Fort Huachuca, Sierra Vista area for 4 months myself. I was stationed there.
Well, in Arizona.
In Arizona, and one of the greatest things I remember doing is on the weekends we would wake up at 4 and, you know, sign out of the base, and we'd go running, you know, through these mountain passes and stuff like that. And there's nothing like beating the sun and watching the sun come up, especially if you've already been running 45 minutes to an hour, and see that coming up. I just remember that, you know, I may not be a religious man, so to say, but as far as spirituality, it's hard to deny in those moments.
I get that, yeah. Now, did you spend a lot of time jumping over rattlesnakes?
So where I was, Fort Huachuca's maybe 10 minutes from the border in some areas. Mainly the tarantulas. That's what surprised me there. Yeah. There was tarantulas all through that little area.
They're cuddly.
But you know, not a lot of snakes. And the vegetation there is mainly just the I can't even remember the name of the type of cactus, but almost the stereotypical cactus of, you know, one stalk and just 2 little branches turned up.
Saguaro.
Saguaro. There we go.
Saguaro cactus, yeah.
But
now, if you were there, was that anywhere near Bisbee, Arizona, or Douglas?
Let's see. It was like an hour and a half from Tombstone and like 4 hours from Phoenix is the main things I remember.
That's pretty far. That's pretty far, yeah.
It was like I said, it was real near the border.
Yeah, I've been to Tombstone and Bisbee many times, you know. So yeah, I love the culture of that. I love the early pioneer culture in the area too. You know, all the way up and through the, you know, Earp Brothers and Tombstone and all of that.
Oh, absolutely.
Interesting to me as well, just the culture at the time. So.
Well, one of the things I love.
You can see why you obviously can see where I got sort of found a lot of my my voice for poetry from the land there.
Absolutely.
People spend time there with it to really feel that spirituality of it, you know.
Yeah. Now, I mean, the one cool thing to me about we're going to call it the South in total, whether you're talking about Southwest or Southeast. One of the things I noticed when I was in that Arizona area, one little term come to mind of rugged individuality. You know, people of the Southwest and people of the Southeast are both, in this way, their own person. You know, this is my land. This is my thing. This is what I do. And I think that's a chord that struck with me. And I think it's a chord even in some of these books, even when you're talking about, you know, some of the Plain Indians and things like that. I find this rugged individuality moving through it. And I thought that was an interesting thing.
Well, there were people who, you know, that's always been important. Place is an important theme in all my writing. Place is very, very important. And when I talk about the natives, they think of that as their native land, you know, and that that's part of who they are. Just like in Louisiana, we think of the culture here. This is part of who we are. Louisiana is part of us, you know. And people in the South, we're all part of this one. Although it's many cultures, different kinds of cultures in the South, we all think of ourselves sometimes as the South. We're part of this culture, you know. And I think that native tribes did that to some degree, but they thought of themselves distinctively too, tribe to tribe to tribe, you know.
Yeah, even as far as like they may have been, you know, the Pueblo people or something like that, but it was this tribe, that tribe, you know. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
The Native American tale is also such a tragedy too.
Yeah, it's
yeah, I write about that too.
It is some of the
have
book.
some poems in there about that as well.
And it's such a tragedy. I don't know. I don't really read a whole lot of creative literature, but I don't think that people write about it much anymore.
I think it's almost like our. I don't want to say dirty secret. It's not that. It's almost like almost like the crazy aunt that you don't talk about because she's crazy. You just leave it alone, and in so many ways, it's just not talked about anymore.
Well, even though it is such a tragedy, I mean, it is something that I don't want to say.
Well, it is.
I don't want to say entertaining, but definitely interesting.
Oh yes.
So it's something that whenever I read about Native American culture and what ended up happening to them, I just want to keep reading it.
Yeah.
I want to know more. It's not.
You know,
I don't want to push it away. It's not. I don't know. I think interesting is the better word.
well, it is a tragedy. It's one of two major tragedies this country has suffered and in many ways continue to suffer and have never taken full responsibility for. But you know, with Native Americans, to come in and kick them off their own land, of course, to my way of thinking, was, oh, that's wrong on so many levels. You know? Just so many levels, you know. And then criticize them for their ways and try to make them something that they're not in the name of Jesus Christ. You know.
And then you get
I can't imagine Jesus Christ having ever kicked people off their land.
And then
I don't think Jesus Christ would have wanted anybody to come in and kick other people off their land.
True.
And then there's the people that want to justify it somehow, and I've run into a couple of those people, and I just don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been. I will say it would have been a difficult social experiment to figure out how to live side by side. However, the answer that we came up with of constant fighting, you know, the Indian War years and shipping off to reservations was a terrible answer. It's a terrible substitution, and yeah,
Well, it was. We claimed this country basically in the name of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
right.
Basically, we claimed this country in that name, and that just took precedent over every other consideration. So that's really what it amounted to. And we have to consider too that I don't know where people miss the boat on this, and how discussions and arguments end so flatly, is that the history of human history is just a series of men's wars.
Yeah,
everything
absolutely.
everything else is backdrop. History is a series of men's wars, and they're still going on. It's part of who and what we are. You know, it's a big part of who and what we are, and it's as simple as that. You know.
Yeah, in many ways, our ancient history, the only things that were ever even written about were the wars, you know, and for us to even understand people as a society, we have to try to look beyond the veil of war to even find out who these people are sometimes, you know.
Yeah, but there's never been a period when we were not at war. Human beings have been at war around the world since the very beginning. I mean, think about Cain and Abel.
Right.
I mean, if you look at the Bible for a reference, there's your first reference right there, you know, that there's always going to be adversity, and it's just part of who we are. It's part of the human condition. And it all just grows from there. Multiply that times many people, and you have war. And that's human history is a series of men's wars, and like I said, everything else has been just backdrop, you know.
Well, people like very much to forget that people are just animals that exist. I mean, we are very much a part of nature, and we are not really that different. Like, if someone comes up, touches my food, I'm going to be upset, and I'm going to take my food back. And just people always forget that's what we are whenever they want to act like, you know, they talk about peaceful times. I'm like, there's never peaceful times in history. Because that's mainly what I study at college. And honestly, historians hate talking about war because that's the questions that everyone wants to talk to them about. It's just, well, what about, you know, especially like World War II is the ones that I just learned just don't even bother. They'll just about bite your head off if you ask anything about like anything like that.
Well, I wish there were more writers. Southeastern Missouri University publishes a series annually of it's a collection of works by American soldiers, sailors, the military period, male, female, every issue imaginable, and they do a fantastic job of it. They're one of the few places around that really is committed to, you know, publishing essays and stories and whatever about war. I'm getting a lot of feedback on my end here. Let me see if I can move to another area of the room here. Hold on just a minute.
No problem.
Yeah. Second, I'm moving over here to see if I can get away from the static.
That's all right. I mean, you are good on our end, by the way, so don't fret.
I don't know. This is better now. The static has kind of gone away.
Good deal. Okay. I do want to read a few poems out of Plain Speak.
Sure.
The first one here that I'm going to do, talking about the desert a few minutes ago, was Desert Song. So I want to do that one. From the hush of secret canyons, twisted peaks and spires, dawn arrives in song. The crackling, rogue-faced cliffs of Kako look out upon the fabled land and listen to the whispers. The haunting trills of native flutes arising with the east, swelling, littling of the magnitude of the day. Sing on, spirits, send down your prayers of desert hymn and holy affirmation. Still our waters, heal the freckless land, swell our souls with song. So, I mean, one of the cool things about Plain Speak is you have long poems, you have short poems in here. But, you know, when I read one like Desert Song, it's both a prayer and a song. You know, it almost comes across as an Indian hymn. And that's what struck me. It's like, oh my goodness, am I reading something that if the Indians had written the Bible, it would have been out of the Psalms? Right. You know?
Well, I was really moved to write these things as I think most writers experience this from time to time. I felt like something inside me was really, you know, almost taking my hand and writing it in my mind. It's something spiritual for me, you know. So many of the poems about that you read in there about the Native Americans, I had that same sort of feeling as I was writing them, you know.
And I think you in that same time though you caught the imagery of the land, you know, and the love of the land, and drew the land, you know, and it was just like, you know, kind of like we're going back to that rugged individuality and the idea of my land. It just strikes that chord of, it don't matter whether I own an acre of swamp or an acre of desert, This is my love, my land and how I love it.
Right. The land of my alma, my soul.
Right. And then, so that's going to lead me to this next one. It is in a different part, but it's called Swamp Dawning.
Oh, yeah, that's Louisiana.
And this one's Louisiana, but I want to read this one because we have parallels, but yet differences in these.
Yeah.
So Swamp Dawning. White cranes perch upon the cypress knees and shimmer on the waking waters. Hazy faces curl from the mirrored surface, primordial and untamed. Lazy shell life dapples the fringes, awaiting sun rays that warm the current, cause the brim and bass to stir. The still air steeped in lily scents, wafts and swirls, do-si-do, as a crane takes flight, its first foray into the inner chambers of the secret vastness, stretching aimlessly across the Atchafalaya. And that was Swamp Dawning.
Yeah, I've spent time in the South and in the Atchafalaya Basin before, so, these are images that I really felt, I've seen or, it's just very real for me. So I can see it, I can smell it, all my senses come to bear on my poetry, So.
Oh, and I mean, like I said, the thing that's beautiful to me about both of them is they're two steps away from being a hymn, both this idea of a prayer, this idea of owning, and I don't mean owning as in this is mine, no one else can have it, but
right.
Owning it as in the spiritual connection with, these areas. And that's what really struck me in plain speak of, I'm right there. I've been there. I know where he's talking about. I know this area, I've seen that fog across the Atchafalaya Basin. I've felt that the sun rays come up on Arizona areas and in the desert out there. And
right.
So I just want to, take a moment and say that's beautiful,
I'm glad you found that in there. There's one, I've been invited to speak at the Louisiana Book Festival, our major book festival at the State Capitol building, 3 times. This last time, I was asked to speak about that book, the poetry book, and Delta Flats. I was there to talk about both those books in different sessions, of course. And when I was speaking there for the poetry one, our new state poet laureate selected all the people who were invited to be on the panel with him. And I was very flattered that he invited me to be on the panel with him for that book. And interestingly, though, when I got there, because it's the Louisiana Book Festival, they asked me to make one of the poems. I was supposed to read 3 poems, but they wanted me to read one particular one about the cafeteria. And I was really surprised that they asked me to do that. Did you happen to read that one in the book?
I did. I don't have it marked to where I could go to it really quickly, but
my point is that the way the speaker is there, it was for some reason, I guess because it's Louisiana, they really connected with that one, and I was kind of surprised. They wanted me to read any other 2 that I selected out of. They wanted me to insist that I read that one, and with inflection, with the voice.
Right. Bring it forward.
Women cafeteria worker, these women cafeteria workers. So I had to affect those voices. But that was kind of interesting for me that not only did I write it, but then I had to perform it. So that was interesting. But we have one of the best book festivals in the United States, Louisiana Book Festival, and it's always held in the actual chambers, the congressional chambers at the state building, Capitol building. So it's really impressive when you go. If you've never been, I would encourage you. Huge celebration that day.
I haven't been. I'll have to put that on my list of stuff to do.
Yeah.
What time of the year is that usually?
It's always the end of October.
End of October?
This year it'll be on October the 28th.
Will you be there this year?
No, I won't be. I'm not speaking this year, but I'm just, typically they don't invite people back, but I've been very blessed. They've invited me 3 years.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
when I finish, I'm working on 2 novels right now. When I finish one of them again, I perhaps they'll invite me back to speak about that one of those 2. I don't know, but it's just a wonderful invitation, and I just get together with very well-known authors, and it's just a wonderful day, getting to meet people close up and discuss things with them, that sort of thing. So.
Oh yeah, networking is always a beautiful thing.
Well, not just that, just meeting them. I went to the readings of other writers who came in from various parts of the United States. And where else are you going to meet them? There's 3 places you can meet them when they if they're at a book signing, there's no chance of talking to them because they're constantly signing books.
Right.
But
yeah.
they have at the Louisiana Book Festival a whole room set up for just the speakers, the presenters. And so we go in and mix and mingle with each other. And the Friday night before, there's a big author event for everybody, just authors and their significant others. So it's just a wonderful kind of thing that the state provides. No other state provides those 2 things.
That is nice. Yeah, I mean, because it is always neat to meet someone doing the same thing or something along that same lines as you, and getting to meet, they say never meet your heroes, but I would definitely say meet your contemporaries. You should definitely meet your contemporaries.
It's a great deal for anybody who's going to listen to your blog cast here, who might be considering that. It's a wonderful place to take kids. They have all kinds of events for kids, too. So.
Awesome. So it's toward the end of October usually.
October the 28th this year.
October 28th this year.
Yeah. Always on a Saturday.
Always on a Saturday. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now there's another story in here, and it was right next to Swamp Dawning. I think the page before. Yes. And I read this one, and this one is all local stuff inside of it. Transitory.
Transitory.
Yes. Excuse me. Sorry. I'm my speaking and reading is slow today.
Need some nootropics.
Yeah, I had a lot of hard workouts this week, and it seems to have drained the mental powers.
Oh, you're fine. Absolutely fine.
Yeah, I do jiu-jitsu as well as, I'm still in the military. Wow. So it does have a tendency sometimes that second workout, do that a few days in a row, and you definitely find yourself a little slow on the take.
Yeah.
But, transitory. I want to read that one. And, this is another one that I hadn't fed to Matt yet. So we'll see what he thinks about it, too.
I'm hungry.
You're hungry?
Feed me.
I'll feed you. A ribbon of asphalt winds northward through the flat delta and bayou traces, narrowing sharply south of Bastrop, Cotton Town and county seat. Home to early settlers who pushed into the region occupied by the Washita tribe, whose homeland sprawled eastward to the ancient mounds of Poverty Point and the great, muddy river beyond. The square, once bustling with promise, now withers on, tired, starving vines, decomposing with economic ruin, rising crime, a proud bastion of gracious southern living, taking a last bow before disappearing into the pages of history.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's about Bastrop, yeah.
Yeah, and it's about Bastrop, and someone who's never been to Bastrop would be like, whatever, But when you're there and you see these old buildings and the town that it is, and then you hear the crime rate and you hear about the things that go on to it.
You see pictures of what it used to be from a long time ago.
That one struck a chord with me, to say in the very least, because it was beautiful because you hit the history, you put the Washita tribe there, and something we haven't really talked about is that the North Louisiana area around here actually has a rich Indian history and Native American history.
Of course.
And the Washita River and Washita Parish, these are Indian words, Shinny Lake. Matter of fact, most Americans can't even read these words when we write them down for them. How do you say that?
Natchitotes.
Yeah.
So, I had people say Ouchita.
I think Natchitotes is my favorite.
Natchitotes.
No, that's Natchitoches. How is that Natchitoches?
Yeah.
They say Aspidus.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it just shows you, it depends on where you grow up sometimes on how you read, on what words even mean. What is that, pecan versus pecan?
It's pecan.
Yeah.
It's not pecan.
Pecan.
Not pecan either. It's pecan. It's always going to be pecan.
But,
well, of course, I grew up with pecans, and I picked 1 million of them when I was a kid. Would pick them off the ground and sell them to Tyner Petrus up there, and I think they paid us like a nickel or a dime a pound for them or something like that,
Oh, yeah, and I mean, pecan orchards are still around here. I mean,
Oak Grove.
Yeah, Oak Grove. Even more so, our mall was built on a pecan grove. Pecan Land Mall. I mean, that's a part of, and I mean, you still drive by like the CenturyLink building on 165 North there, and it's still in the middle of a pecan orchard, and I mean,
tearing those down to put in part of CenturyLink, that development they're doing, really broke my heart. See, I live here in Sterlington.
Yes.
And so going by there and watching them build it, I think, they've stripped out these beautiful pecan trees, pecan orchards. Hated that.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. It was very mixed feelings. And I actually remember just walking through there as a young man, maybe going bowling and then going over there and grabbing a few pecans myself, and growing up eating them. And, so, I mean, I guess one of the things I loved about that story is you painted history and then you painted the present in it. Yeah. And I don't even think sometimes people realize the depth of the history around here in this area.
Well, so many times.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So many times now, like, I think about Monroe right now, where you're just watching a lot of, you can call it whatever you want, Central Business District or whatever, but honestly, it's just downtown. You're just watching it just get it's just withering away, and that radius that's withering away is just getting bigger and bigger, where you're just seeing all these, like, I don't know, like Cotton's in Monroe, the restaurant over there by Endham Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I love that place, but that's an old building that hardly anyone, like, most people don't even know where it is whenever I tell them.
Versus actually going and renting it and using it.
Right, and whenever I tell them where it is, they're like, there's a business there? I'm like, yeah.
That you can rent for any occasion. There's beautiful double spiral stairways in it, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean.
Very beautiful building.
Yeah. Well, that was a business building. Of course, I'm a lot older than you guys are, so when I came back here 2 years ago and I drove down Desert Street, and what it reminded me of, my imagery that I got from it as I was driving along, I thought, my gosh, this looked like a jack-o'-lantern along here. All these gaps in between, where the buildings have been, gutted in certain areas along. Felt like I was looking at the face of a jack-o'-lantern, with the teeth. Like this, with the buildings, teeth missing on here.
Yeah.
See, I can remember exactly the names of many of the stores that were there when I was a kid growing up, and it was the hub of all activity, and I remember Christmases, how big that was on there, and I mean, it was just everything centralized then when I was a kid, and it was very, very different. And in my mind and other people's minds, my age and my generation, we remember. I'm from the baby boomer generation, and we remember what it was like before. And it really made me sad driving along there to see that, so much history is gone. So.
Well, I mean, that's part of what I appreciate you doing with these books is you actually have preserved on some form of canvas the painting of what it is. I mean, you're drawing the people, you're drawing the areas, you're just doing it in words. And actually the beauty of the words is you capture the way I'm going to say we in this case, speak about it, or the way we even structure a sentence.
It's the way I think about it in my mind.
Yes, very much so. And I mean, that's where I'm appreciative at. I still say ain't in my mind.
That's fine.
5,000 times a day.
It's a word.
It's a word.
What's wrong with that? Yeah, what's wrong with that? I don't have a problem with that at all. It's part of the culture here, and I mean, to me, that would be, as offensive as walking into tribal land or something and telling them, "Gee, you're not pronouncing that correctly, or that's not the right way to say it." When it's their own language, their own dialect, you know, presume to do that. Same thing with Southern culture. I don't think people should come in and say, "Well, that's not standard American English." So it's not standard American English, but it's just as valid as any other.
That's
you know,
right.
It is very aggravating traveling anywhere and people assuming you're stupid.
Yeah, you throw out a y'all, and they're like, "Why'd you say that?"
Yeah, of course, you know, and they think that you must guys, I tell you, I've had this before, literally, guys, and I hope I don't get sued for making this remark, but,
No.
you know, being from here, I mean, what I'm about to say here, friends of mine in California before I moved away kept saying to me things like, "My God, is everybody in your hometown really like those Robertson Duck people? Are they really like those people? You know, I mean, my God, you know, is everybody there, you know, ignorant and stupid, or they all wear those costumes?" Or, you know, they would say very strange things to me. You can cut that part out if you want.
No, absolutely no, and you know,
the reaction I got from people there. There was only one of two. The first thing they'd say, "You're from Louisiana? Oh, you must be from New Orleans." When I say, "No, I'm from northern Louisiana."
Robertson's the next.
They knew about the Robertsons, and then they would ask me those questions I just told you there. You know, is everybody as backwoodsy and inbred as these people appear to be?
You know, and it's so funny because when you meet Phil or Cy, you know, I've met Cy on several occasions. He's a big supporter. He's a big vet supporter. You know, and then you got to realize, in many ways, he's just joking for the camera.
That's
Of course they are. Of course they are. You know, you got to have a gimmick, as I mentioned earlier, and theirs is they knew that this would sell, and that they have really rode to financial glory on this horse. You know, and they've done very, very well with it, and they've milked it very, very well. So, in terms of being smart business-wise, I would, you know, certainly commend them on it.
Actually, yeah, if anything, tell them California friends, don't be jelly that they figured out a way to make money.
Yeah, to make money doing what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, and then, of course, people point out things like, "Well, I've seen pictures of these people before they put on these costumes, and they look very normal at the beach in Florida and places like that, looking preppy practically."
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, the Robertson sons, I mean, growing up, they didn't have the big beard and all that, but at the same stroke, it is a culture thing. It's nothing to see that kind of beard and that type of personality walking around here.
It is now.
Well, that was their point. It's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? But all these big beards and wearing camouflage to church, you know, and what are you hunting in church? I mean, what do you camouflage in church? And, you know, in restaurants, what are you hunting inside fine restaurants? I mean, why do you need to be camouflaged? Are you hiding from somebody, or what's, you know, that culture rose out of, in great part, rose out of the Robertson show, the Duck show.
Yes.
You know, and then singing, everybody in town wants to look like, every guy in town wants to look like these people, you know, and starts wearing this. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did this many people wear camouflage to all those places prior to that show coming on TV?
A little bit of both, I would say. It's a little bit of both.
I wasn't here. But those are the kinds of questions that I had to entertain.
If anything, people around here stopped growing their beards out and stopped wearing camo so much because of the Duck dynasty.
Yeah, once again, that rugged individuality thing. Well, I mean, you know, it's weird. I mean, I'm only 30, but I went to West Washita High School. You know, it was a little more, and it was a little more country now than it is, or it was then than it is now. And you know, I probably grew up in the last generation that will ever remember bringing a gun hanging into your gun rack in the back of your truck and a deer hanging out. Now. Yeah, and a dead deer that you just killed before class.
It's not happening now.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, the moment that something like Duck Dynasty did come around, it captured some of that culture, but at the same time destroyed it. And, you know, I don't hate it for doing that. I don't love it for doing it. It's just, it happened.
change.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
created a change. It created a shift. But I will say this, it's better than being remembered as the area where Billy the Exterminator came from.
Right.
That was the thing. Before Duck Dynasty, you had Billy the Exterminator in Shreveport there, and that show, oof. But
I don't know anything about. See, I wasn't here during any of these things happening, and any of this change took place. So when people would ask me, I still have. I can't believe this, guys. I have people, my former colleagues at the universities where I taught there. I'm still very good friends with them via email and Facebook and that sort of thing. They still ask me from time to time, are those duck people still on the TV, or does everybody in the state wear camouflage now? Or they ask questions like that. They're just curious. They're not really being really nasty, mean. They're just kind of curious about culture. How cultures change and the kinds of cultural differences there are here compared to there.
I mean, those are really fair questions.
They are fair questions, and I mean, you have two choices when put with a question like that. You can either get all offended and assume it's a microaggression, which could be its own hour-long conversation, or you could just be like, this is innocence, this is ignorance in an innocent manner, wanting to know and be educated. This is someone wanting to know, and that's how I tend to view those type of things. I grew up hunting, but now, of course, I get a few chances to do it. Matt still hunts pretty regularly. But
I grew up that way in my home when I was a kid growing up. Our home was a source of fascination for quite a few of my friends. My father was always a big hunter, and so we belonged to 2 different hunting camps. And in our den, we had deer on all 4 walls in the den were just all the way around. We had a big den, and there were deer heads all the way around. And so when I would have friends over, they'd just come in, you'd think they were in a museum. They just couldn't get past the den. They couldn't get past the den. They just fascinated by that,
But you were also raised that you probably hardly bought hamburger meat at the same stroke, right? So, I mean, I know I was raised that way.
You mean because you ate venison a lot?
Yes, a lot. Yeah. Only because of McDonald's did I even know what cow meat really tasted like.
Hog.
Yeah.
Hog was a big one.
Yeah, I was raised on a lot of hog, a lot of deer meat, and even duck meat.
Squirrels for a little bit. That's way too much work for that little bit of meat.
Yeah, squirrel stews.
Did you guys grow up on farms?
No, I just grew up, well, I should say this. My father was raised on a farm.
Yeah.
And he grew up hunting a lot, and so he hunted and still does. He's still a big hunting, fishing type guy. And I guess I learned that through proxy of that's what we're going to do on Saturday. We're going to wake up at 4. We're going to get in the deer stand before the sun rises.
Yeah.
Who knew that it would feed into my military career so well? Of course you get up before the sun rises.
And I spent the first few years of my life in Urania, Louisiana, and then
I know where Urania is.
Yeah, and then we moved to Swartz for a little bit, and then that was suburbs until I was about 8 to 10, and then me and my dad just didn't like that.
Right. Yeah.
So then we moved to Eris, and that's where I'm living now on my own.
Where? Eris?
Eris, Louisiana.
Well, I know where that is. That's where my mother's people are all from. My mother's people are all from Eris. And Chatham. My father's people are from Chatham. That's where the Spillers. And
okay.
Spiller family.
If you know any Spillers, I'm related to them. If you know any Hearnes in the area, in fact, the town of Chatham was almost named Hearne. We were the first settlers in that town.
Yeah, but Hearne Racetrack doesn't sound the same.
Hearne's Racetrack? I think that's something different.
No, I'm saying the Chatham Dirt Track.
Oh, yeah.
And the Hearne Dirt Track. The Chatham Dirt Track kind of rolls off the tongue a little better.
That's right.
Yeah, well, we're all related, and Concord Cemetery there is full of Hearne. That's our family cemetery there.
That's right. It's actually your family tree just put out, right there for everybody to see.
Well, yeah, you can just go to the Concord Methodist Church there in the cemetery out back. I mean, all my forebears practically are buried in that cemetery. My father's people, the Hearnes.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a Hearne. Matter of fact, he was a guest on here. I think we talked about it. He didn't have the E at the end of his name.
Yeah.
But okay, was that something that you think he actually probably is kin to you in that way?
Absolutely. The Hearnes original, we have a very strong, and, well, I don't know, I don't see you to show you, but there was a huge volume, about 800 pages, written by a Hearne about my family, the whole family heritage of the Hearnes, and written in 1910, and has been reproduced many times. And it's quite a long saga for when the Hearnes settled here. But what happened was, like many immigrants to this country, people were distorting the spelling of their names, and they just found that E on the end to be superfluous, so they just lopped it off. But yeah, we would be related if you take it back far enough. But the original spelling had the E on the end of it, and that's the family crest. It's Hearne with an E on the end of it. You know?
I'll have to mess with him about it. Now, what's the name of that book? I mean, just in case he's interested in it.
It's the Hearne family.
Just called Hearne Family? Okay.
The history of the Hearnes, history of the Hearne family, you know.
That's really a stroke of luck.
What's that?
Having a book written on your family history, usually it's...
Yeah, well, we have lots of that. You know, when I said earlier that Chatham was almost named after my family, we were the very first ones to settle that area, Jackson Parish. And that was like 1850. And the Hearne came first. The News Star, at the time was the Monroe Morning World here, in 1955 wrote a cover story about my family coming across there. We have 5 family Bible records and a journal. Someone kept a journal of their trip from Carrollton, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, to the last leg from there coming into Chatham, Louisiana, and they arrived there on Christmas Eve, you know, and they described in the journal everything, you know, how much it cost to ford the rivers and the streams, and how much they paid for supplies along the way, and the deaths. And
wow,
that is incredibly well documented.
Yeah, I mean,
it is incredibly well documented. So my family has, I come from a lot of Methodist ministers, Methodists are in our family a lot, and they kept Bibles and Bible records of births and deaths and that sort of thing, and kept journals and that sort of thing. Very well preserved, you know. So
you didn't have a chance. You were going to be a writer, it seems.
Yeah, I was bred into
it. What?
Yeah, it seems like you was bred to be a writer.
I have no idea. You know, it's so funny. I have 2 brothers who have absolutely no interest in it. As I've already shared with you guys, I didn't set out to do this, but I'm really glad that it's like, you know, reinventing myself. And this only started about, a decade or more ago, you know, when I just started tinkering around with things. But it's just turned out to be such great fun, you know.
Well, all I can say is thank you for keeping yourself open to the possibility of reinventing yourself, because in my mind and in my emotions, you definitely done it in a master stroke.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I don't flatter myself into thinking that I'm a great author or anything like that, but I do write what I like, what I want to write, and if people like it, fine, and if they don't, it's not a big deal to me.
That's a beautiful way to be. I think that in of itself could solve 80% of people's issues with their own life. You know, yeah, do what you want to do, how you want to do it, in a way that makes you happy.
Yeah, I had a very, very successful career as a teacher and then for university professor, and I just never wrung my hands over my jobs, and in this as well, I never set out to be, you know, great author and write the great American novel or anything. So I don't have any really emotional investment in it. I just don't have that kind of emotional investment like, you know, some writers, many writers I think do, and everything's riding on whether or not they finish a novel or if it's a bestseller. I don't have any concern about those things, you know. So anyway.
All right, so there's another one I'm going to hit here, and I liked this one because it almost felt like you wrote it as it happened. If you will pardon the expression, it is another poem, and it's just named Rain, and it's inside of Plain Speak.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It rained today and danced into the stillness of night, to never hear the same cool drops of heaven's pearls splash and shatter upon the pavement and sweep away into eternity. No note so sweet, nor soft refrain, no lull so bittersweet as rain. You know, and this one leads me to one question. At what time of the night do you write? Because
Time
that
of
felt
the night, I'm a night person.
that felt
I
like a
write-
3 a.m. one.
Yeah, I write mostly afternoons, late afternoons,
Okay.
and sometimes at night. I've never been a real it's so funny. I've had to get up early because of my career. I get up early, but I've never really been a morning person. And
I agree.
My creative juices, come alive mid-afternoon and then into the evening and that sort of thing. But that particular poem that you mentioned there was inspired by a trip I made when I was really young to New Orleans. In fact, I wrote that poem when I was in undergraduate school at University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas, and I wrote that many, many years ago.
So does that mean
But
that Mr. Hearne has an old spiral notebook somewhere that he sometimes flips to poems, old poems too? Because
more like bits and pieces, not a spiral, but bits and pieces, like maybe pulled out of a binder or something. But that one I'd have to track down where. As I transferred these things to type them into text on the computer, I probably threw the original handwritten things away, but I wrote quite a few that have been published when I was in college. I had no clue I did not think of myself as a poet, certainly. And I was just tinkering around with words. And as it turned out, years later, several of those poems have been published. So.
I mean, yeah, and I mean, like you said, that one has a younger man's voice to it, and that was actually part of my question. And you ran right into it and telling that story that it was, when you was a younger man.
That was written about the same time. There's another one in that vein, and this was in New Orleans too. It was inspired by my being in New Orleans, and it was raining. It's called Morning After, Mourning, Morning After.
Yeah.
And that one's very much like that one. So,
okay.
But I remember that time in my life. It was, I think I was going through a trying time,
Well, nothing seems to sometimes help us create than sometimes the troubling times.
Oh, of course, that's what the blues are meant for. I tried explaining that to my very closest and best friend in California, and he just couldn't understand why I liked the blues. And he said, man, it just really bums me out, And I said, you don't understand the function of the blues. That's what washes away all this. That's what washes it all away, You get it out of your system with the blues. That's what they're intended. That's right. That's what they're intended to do. That's the way of crying, actually.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
That
one of the things, just I guess a personal anecdote is like, once I got back from my deployment in Afghanistan, I spent a lot of time just writing the experience down. I would write the day down, and I should say I wrote it down again because at the end of every day, one of the ways that I would allow myself to go to sleep is I would write till I fell asleep what happened that day. And when I got back home, rewriting it was a catharsis. It was a way of I guess I'm gonna use my limited language here, a way to bleed it out, a way to let it go, and in many ways that's what the blues is. That's what trying times are. If you write it down, it allows you to let it go, in a way that other
Well, I get it. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I agree with you 100%. But he had never thought of that. See, I grew up here in Louisiana, where I listened to a lot of jazz and blues growing up. So I understood what the blues are, And my mother loved music, and her favorite singer was Dinah Washington. You probably never heard of her, but she's called the Queen of the Blues. And mother would put those songs on the radio, on her stereo rather, and I listened to those in my home. I listened to them so much, and I came to understand fundamentally. I wouldn't have told it to you this way because I was pretty young then, but I got the idea that this is the way people get rid of the blues. They listen to these things, and it's like crying. It's like crying it out. Just go ahead and cry it out, And then you felt better. And then when I go to New Orleans and listen to this, and it just reaffirmed that for me. These people know exactly what the purpose of the blues are. Singing the blues.
Oh yeah, well, I think we kind of alluded to Southern pride in the short story that we read. That Southern people can be a little prideful. I'm not going to show.
A little?
Yeah, okay. A lot. A lot. But, yeah, I think that maybe that's a way as a culture we've found a way to bleed it out. Even with old school country music. I can't say new school country music, but older school country music. There's a reason why it was sometimes referred to as the other blues or white man blues. I've heard it referred to and it's that same thing.
I haven't heard that term, but it's really interesting that you mentioned that. I had never heard it called that, but that's really a very good description of it, country blues like that, or white man's blues, country blues, because really was, I think, about some of the, when I was a kid growing up, and the country music I heard growing up is very different from what qualifies as country today.
Yeah, you're not telling me nothing, sir.
Well, don't even get me started.
Well, in my generation, people in my generation think that country music today is where 1970s, really bummed out. 1970s rock went to die. This became country music.
Well, yeah, and that is part of what happens. I mean, if Johnny Cash showed up today, people probably wouldn't think that he was country. They would probably think he's rock, because of what he said. But if you listen to somebody like Conway Twitty, Patsy Cline, that's blues music. He just put it to a steel guitar rather than, a brass band, in my head, anyway.
Right. Well, I don't know. I know for a fact that the country music I listened to as a child growing up here on the radio, KMLB, played country music at that time when I was a child growing up. And what I heard then on the radio and what I hear now on the radio are worlds apart as country music. So.
Well, Mr. Hearne, believe it or not, we have done this for 2 hours.
Oh, gosh. I didn't have a clock. Wow. Listen, you're welcome to edit this any way you wish.
Oh, no, sir.
Not at all.
Not at all. The whole thing goes. And
wow, that's a long time.
Well, that's one of the beautiful things about a show like this. I mean, I like to capture the person, I like, and I appreciate you coming on here and being open, honest, and telling us your stories, and telling us about you.
Well, I enjoy getting to know you guys, too. And once again, I just really think I admire you for, inviting people on from various backgrounds and from the arts and other kinds of things. I think that just enriches your program tremendously.
Thank you, sir.
That you're willing to, or that you're interested, rather, in having people, from all kinds of backgrounds come on and talk about issues and what they're into, but especially with the music and arts and things like that, because there's nothing like that around here.
No, sir, and
you're unique in that respect. So.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I've learned in life, and I think even Matt agrees with me, first step is to understand I know absolutely nothing. Second, find someone who knows their sliver of the universe. And if we get enough interesting people talking about their sliver of the universe, then maybe we can find what all holds us together, Yeah. And
well, you've got an interesting mission for sure. And
yes,
it's really good to meet both of you, and I wish you both lots of good luck and take care.
I appreciate that. Now, with your novels, I know they can be found on Amazon. Do you have? Yeah, I know you have DixonHearne.com, correct?
They can buy them. They can buy any of them through Amazon, and also Barnes and Noble. Not Barnes and Noble. I forget. It's Books A Million here.
Books A Million. Here, yeah.
They have. Well, they have. I know that they have the latest book, Delta Flats. They have copies of that because they asked me to do a book signing there, and they ordered all the books in. So I know that they have copies of that there, and they may have Plantatia. I don't know. I don't know what they have, So, but they can be ordered through Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, any major bookseller. You can buy any of my books through. You just have to call them, and they'll order it in if they don't have it in stock.
Okay.
Well, if you ever wish for us to plug you, you just contact us.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever have, I know you're saying you're working on a couple of novellas there. Whenever you get one out, I mean, by all means, sir, send it to me, and we'll do this again.
Okay.
And
I appreciate it.
And that's
You know?
also true with, you mentioned a couple of friends of yours. If they have something they want to talk about,
Yeah.
let them know, or give me their contact info. I'll call them and let them know personally.
I will do that. David Armand, as I mentioned, he's such a gifted young writer. He's just really up and comer. In fact, he was invited to speak to the Morehouse Literary Forum, or whatever it's called here. I did that last year, and I noticed he was invited to speak here sometime this fall. He would be a good person to interview, really good person to interview.
Absolutely.
I mean, this guy will probably be a Pulitzer winner someday. He's just really a fantastic young writer. A little older than you are, just a little older than you are, but just a truly talented young writer. So.
Okay.
Anyway, okay, well, guys, thanks a lot. I appreciate the invitation.
No problem, Mr. Hearne, and thank you. And until again next time, you have a good day, okay?
You guys too. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Dixon Hearne.
Well, just before we end it, I got to say, a Southern man writing Southern writings, and he's got probably the best name for it.
Dixon Hearne.
Dixon Hearne.
Yeah, his mama knew what she was doing.
That's a powerful name for a Southern author.
It is. He also does have a Twitter account. He has a Facebook account, don't use it a lot, at Dixon Hearne *1 for his Twitter. For his Twitter. Y'all follow him. He updates that as far as talk engagements that he does, book signings. He does operate a lot in this area, and it's a good guy to know.
If you're interested in his work, check it out.
Hey, I only gave y'all short flavors, and I hope that I did him justice there.
Little teases of taste.
Because I'm telling you, it's that straightforward language that we all know. It's written concisely. I blew through these books not because of any other reason other than it kept me hooked. I sat down at 10 o'clock and I was like, all right, I'll read one or two little short stories. Yeah, and then I'm done. I read the whole thing and I was like, wow.
I think you messaged me about that right after you did it.
Yeah, so really, guys, I just encourage, just go buy one of his books. And one cool thing about it being a group of short stories, this isn't a $30 book.
No.
These are, $10, $11, $12 books. Go support a local author and read in this genre. He actually referred to it as grit lip genre. Read it. You're missing out if you don't.
That's it.
I feel honored to be there.
Right.
That we just did that.
Yeah.
And
that was something special.
yeah, Dylan missed it.
He did.
Boo, Dylan. No, Dylan's doing an important thing today for a friend of ours.
Yeah.
So
gotta be some moral support.
Gotta go be moral support. The man that you bleed with, or the man that you serve with.
Stand with.
It's the man you stand with. All right. Guerrilla Banter Podcast. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Brock. This is Matt.
Checking out.
See y'all later.